Welcome back to Serious Talk Salesforce at Scale. I'm Greg Banks, your host. Thanks for coming along today. If you've ever wondered whether AI can rescue a Salesforce org that was never built with any real structure or boundaries, this conversation has an answer you probably don't want to hear. My guest is Hayley Tuller, a 20-year Navy veteran, a Salesforce solution architect, and the founder of Brighthelm Partners. We get practical about what quality assurance really means for an admin, why the consultant relationship runs on an unavoidable paradox, how a Navy aviation safety framework maps directly onto customer relationship management, and what's still broken and how the ecosystem serves nonprofits and higher education. It's a fun one. Let's get into it. Welcome to Serious Talk Salesforce at Scale. This might feel like the least appropriate title because this is the first guest I've had on that actually could be an expert on all three series that we do here on Serious Talk, the Military Minute, Salesforce at Scale, and our Agentic AI, the great Hayley Tuller. Hayley, thanks for joining me today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you joining. I was privileged to meet Hayley in person. I was in DC for the World Tour back in March. We were both kind of side by side watching the great Bil-𝗪𝗪 get his golden hoodie.
We're just in a Bil-𝗪𝗪 fan club.
That's right. Yeah, we're all at his feet. Shout out to Bill. Definitely. Still working on getting him on here. In fact, one of the reasons you're here today is I reached out to him about a topic, and he says, you really ought to talk to Hayley about that topic. So here we are. So anyway, nonetheless,
threw me under the bus.
So, I don't know if you won or lost. We'll find out. Well, thanks again for joining. So just to give a little background, and she's only 29, but she's done some stuff. 20 years in the U.S. Navy.
Definitely not 29 years old, just for the record.
20 years in the Navy, including combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan as a cryptologic technician. We'll get into defining what that is here in a moment. You went through a series of things on your road to where you are today. You went through Salesforce military training, and then you became a QA coordinator. You were a project manager at Arcus, a solution engineer at 𝗁𝗏𝗃. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Senior admin at Eden Reforestation Projects. I kind of want to hear about that because I got a background in wood preservation. A solutions architect at 𝗁𝗏𝗃. In modern day, in her free time, she's running a company called Brighthelm Partners. To say you're well-versed in a lot of the things that we talk about around here is an understatement, most likely. Don't let me miss. You co-lead the Salesforce Jacksonville nonprofit user group, and you volunteer as a coach with the 𝗦𝗹𝗏𝗀 Foundation. So we'll talk a little bit about them as well today. I always tell people when I interview veterans in particular, the hardest part is introducing you guys because everybody's got 12 irons in the fire. There's no one-trick ponies. It's always amazing to me understanding what all you have done. But thank you for your service to our nation. Thank you for what you do in this community. This community has, in fact, changed my life, and my wife would attest to that fact. Mostly for the better. So you might consider it a wormhole that I refuse to come out of because I just get excited about topics and off I go.
Yes. My husband calls this my lair, for the record.
Well, at least make it comfortable, right?
Yes.
You might be the first guest that had a disco light. Right?
Needs to be vibey if I'm going to spend a lot of time here.
Yeah. So even though this is not a military episode, I would feel remiss if I did not at least ask. Tell me a little bit about why you went in the military and what is it you're doing today that you look back and say, this really set me up for success? What are things you learned in the military that help you?
Yeah, we could literally just talk about that for ages. Yeah. So I was born and raised in Kansas City. Both my parents came up in the medical field in a time when you didn't necessarily need to have a college degree. So my mom went to a really classic nursing program where with the caps and the capes and, the whole thing, and they were taught by nuns, and it was not a college degree, but she got her RN. And my dad started out as an ambulance driver and slowly climbed his way up through hospital management. And so my parents were, they believed in education, but it hadn't been available to them. So they were very adamant, like, you kids are going to college, like, no matter what, like, you're going to college. But I had the awareness that I wasn't really equipped, right? I didn't understand how college worked. I didn't know how to navigate it, and I was concerned about it. So I thought to myself, I still want to do this, but I don't want my parents to have to pay for it unless I'm really sure that I can swing it. So I enlisted in the Navy. The entire reason I wound up in the Navy was because there was an Air Force base and an Army base near where I grew up. And I thought I would be the one that winds up joining the Army and winds up right back here. So
yeah.
On the Navy,
that's hilarious.
Yeah. That is how much thought I put into it, Greg. That is it.
That's very similar to me. Yes. When I was applying to colleges, I actually picked one that was just far enough that I couldn't live at home and attend. I wanted to get out and have some independence and learn some of those things. Not textbook stuff, but
yeah, for sure. And check. It worked.
Yeah.
So I had really only originally planned to just be in for like a tour maybe, and then I was going to get out and go to college. And when I came in the Navy, they gave me a battery of tests. And at some point in basic training, they pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you would be a really good linguist." And I thought they were kidding. And they're like, "No, this is a job and you can do it." So the military sent me to school to learn Arabic. And that was what I did for 20 years in the Navy. So that's, yeah, that was my
So there's
job.
2
Yeah.
on the planet, you and Megan Cutt, and I've talked to both of
Yes.
you this week. I feel privileged. I don't know how you go to study that, but okay.
Yeah. Painfully.
Yeah. Wow.
There's actually an amazing school for it in California. And then I wound up going to Europe for a while, and I said, okay, well, that was fun. It's time for me to go to college. And I was working on getting out. I actually had my separation date and was going to go to the University of Pennsylvania. And at the time I wanted to be a lawyer, and 9/11 happened. So obviously I didn't get out of the Navy. I was on a very short list of people who could do the job that I did. So I was in Afghanistan like 4 months later. So I spent the first like year and a half of the war there. So I missed the initial shock and all, but I was there for about a year and a half after. And then I switched to Iraq for the invasion of Iraq. I was there all the way through the consolidation period, back to Afghanistan in the late aughts. And then I was doing Horn of Africa, Somalia stuff when I retired. So I did finally retire and went to college, got my degree in my 40s alongside freshmen. Yeah, that were like 18 years old. And when I finished school, I decided I wanted to get into nonprofit work. And so that's kind of the story of how I stumbled into the ecosystem. I was a proud accidental admin. So I suppose
Well, everybody's accidental because there is no career path for this in terms of high school counselors, I don't think. But
I think so either. And I honestly really think that, you the second half of your question is like what prepared you, right, from the military. I can list a million things. And I'm sure everybody you have on here has amazing things to say. But one of the things that I think about when I think about admins too is the ability to like constantly adapt to the circumstances and be really empathetic to the users and the people they're supporting. Like it felt like a really natural shift to me because I had the background of like, okay, we have a circumstance, here's a set of tools, figure out how you're going to manage this, right? And that was just something that felt very natural to me. And I think a lot of that was from military service.
So what year did you enter into the ecosystem?
That would have been 2014. Yeah.
So like me, you predated Trailhead.
Yes.
So it was different. Yeah. I came in 2011 and
Completely.
So there was a ton of YouTube out there, but it was all past Dreamforce videos. And there was a decent presence on Twitter if you wanted to reach out and ask for help. But before Trailhead, Salesforce communities did not exist.
No.
And I will go to my grave, and I don't care what else they do from here. The single best thing they ever did was create community, a place for people like you and I to come in and nerd out and ask for help, raise our hand. And I don't know, I was at the Dreamforce where Steve Moe, and I know you know Steve Moe, hashtag you owe me a beer. I was at the Dreamforce where he was awarded his 6-foot lightning bolt for it was the first admin keynote. Wow. Steve is a wonderful guy. I think that, and I need to go look the stat up, but I swear that year they said he had answered 89,000 questions or something. I'm not exaggerating, like a ridiculous number in the community. I'm like, what the freak is your day job that you had time to do this? Either that or he doesn't sleep. But anyway, he has
deep lore though, Greg. Like you're going back to the banks. Yeah.
Yeah. But this is the thing about this community that just, it defies all odds, right? Prior to SaaS, prior to software as a service, and I think Salesforce really was growing, one of the first great big SaaS initiatives out there. But prior to that, if you were involved in any kind of software, there was some nerd in a room somewhere who installed some stuff, and it was hard code programmers. These were not people. And it's what I think is so cool about the Salesforce community is like 90% of the people that are admins and whatnot are not the hard code dev kind of people. I know those people are out there, but that's not who built this community. So it's people like you and I that are not introverts. They're not locked in a closet refusing to talk. I had Mike Gerholdt on. He was the first speaker at my first Dreamforce, and he talked about this term 𝗧𝗹𝗲. If you've not heard him do that, there's an episode on it. Salesforce administration by walking around. Yes. And he's like, go get to know the people, listen to them. Don't wait on them to make up a project for you to do. Talk to them, understand their job, and then come back with some constructive things on how you can make their life better. And that changes the community. It changes adoption. And he's exactly right. I took that to heart because I couldn't even spell CRM when I fell into this. I got kicked into the space. I didn't even fall into it. And it helped me build an organization that long after I left, people still reach out to me and talk about the things that we did. So I'm glad to hear your path into it, but I can certainly understand where the people skills, the team, the backing each other up, all those things in the military that you have to do, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
that's
really
that
effective.
special type of very military-oriented leadership, which is built around this idea of positional authority and leadership as
Yeah,
service, right? Like to me, that
certainly.
was just the same common sense I was taught. Learning to lead in the military is going around and talking with people and having a sense of what's happening and how you can better support them. I think one of the best gifts the Navy ever gave me was an understanding and a vocabulary and a set of practices around servant leadership.
Yeah. And that translates to anywhere in the world you want to go as long as you're working in community, right?
Yes. hmm
Certainly, certainly. So let's dig in a little bit of some of those steps on your journey. My background's in engineering, so I'm
hmm
always looking for the thing around the corner that's wrong that nobody's thought about. That's just naturally that's where my brain goes.
hmm
But you are a QA coordinator, and
Yeah.
you said a Salesforce admin in disguise.
Yes.
Describe
Yes,
that.
sure. So I come at quality assurance as well from an aviation standpoint. So while I was an Arabic linguist, I was also an aircrewman. So I was indoctrinated into quality assurance and, safety management and risk management, all from that same perspective. And the position was actually listed for that. And I had actually gone to apply for a different job. And in the course of talking with them, they said, "Hey, we actually think that you're a better fit for this job over here. It's called quality assurance coordinator." And I thought, oh, sure. But that to me meant something very specific. And anyone who's
Yeah,
been in the military knows exactly what I'm thinking, right?
yeah,
And in the course of talking with them, what they really meant was a systems person. We need a person that understands that in the course of doing work, these things happen and these data points are generated. How do we capture them reliably, maintain their quality, be able to report when necessary? And they had the sense to understand that role was more than just the technology, more than just the platform. It was about being a holistic champion within the organization for quality management and generation and storage of data. And they were able to tie that to outcomes. And it wound up being a Salesforce admin job. They hadn't selected a platform yet, and I was hired under the aegis to select one. So I had actually, when I took the job, had never heard of Salesforce. So when I started doing my research, I was looking at all of the options and I stumbled onto Salesforce and wound up recommending it and they wound up adopting. And that was how I wound up being an accidental admin. But they didn't fully yet understand how those pieces were going to fit together. And that to me was always very, very fundamental to my understanding of what an admin is.
yeah. I know that my first probably 7, 8 years as an admin, I annoyed people to no end about my incessancy about quality.
Yes.
Not from a testing standpoint, but just in general.
hmm
Like when somebody said, I want 13 text boxes, I would look at them like they're alien and I would refuse to further the conversation. So they
hmm
actually had a thought about what we're doing. And the thought is
hmm
the only reason you're putting data in here is so somebody can analyze it and make better
hmm
decisions from it. That's the nature of what CRM does for you. I would venture to say companies who've ignored that, and plenty have, right now, when they're trying to implement AI, they're trying to get a tool to go look at your data and react to it. They're finding out this is like the corporate junk drawer. There's nothing reliable in here because I've
hmm
allowed all this free form, non-dependent, no
hmm
validation rules, whatever you want to call those things, all those things that drive you to some compliance, to a goal.
hmm
It's not compliance for the sake of compliance. It's there because the quality actually matters. It's why we spent the money to put the program in.
And this is the era of comeuppance for the move fast, break things crowd, right? If
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
philosophy until now has been speed mattered above all, velocity equated to success, right? And you weren't thinking about the lessons learned and you weren't building around systems and you weren't defining any things, boy, you're in trouble now.
Mm.
I mean,
Hayley just
it's
launched a t-shirt line. There was like 3 t-shirts in that phrase, move fast and break things.
oh, that's famously, I didn't come up with that. Yeah, that's famously the motto of Facebook when it was first founded, right?
Yeah.
People have now this accumulated deep pile of stuff that now they're trying to sort out. We've been going through at Brighthelm, we've been going through our own agentic transformation where we are eating our own dog food, as Apple used to say, right? And transitioning off of some other tools and onto some of these newer tools. And we're finding out where agents fit into our workflow as well. And it has been, at times frustrating, but arguably the most validating experience of my entire professional life, of the arc of every work that I have ever done. The insistence that we had systems and that things were documented and that we crawl, walked, run, and that we thought through secondary and tertiary consequences and that we captured all that thinking and externalized it. and that we practice transparency and documentation have meant that when we flipped the switch on these things, we jumped so much further ahead than we would have, and what I think most other people are experiencing. There is this growing narrative right now of like, hey, this isn't exactly the magic thing people thought it was, right? The first generations of AI technologies coming out, I think people were really focused on the idea of being able to extract taxonomy out of the wisdom of the LLM and being able to backwards into a process that way. But what they're realizing is there are things that artificial intelligence does extraordinarily well. It's terrible at judgment. It requires
Yeah.
a human, right?
Yeah.
And in
Yeah.
particularly, the higher the level of the judgment, the more it needs that structure from you. So it is not going to save people from the messes that they've made. And indeed, you're just accelerating a mess. And so you have a very fast mess,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's the key. Yeah.
I got to ask, in that user group you're in, is Andy kind of part of that group, the same one you're
Yes,
in?
but he lives in Palm Coast. So,
Yeah.
and also in Jacksonville, I have to tell you, all of the groups
Yeah.
we all go to
I
each
just,
other's stuff. Yes.
I worked
Yeah.
with him for a little while, and he used to teach flows internally here at
Yes.
Sirius. And
Yes.
and he had a phrase that I've quoted him 100 times, probably not to a client, but he's like, if your process sucks and you automate it, you just get crap a lot faster.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And there's so
Yeah.
much truth in that. And I think a lot
Yes.
of people who, as they've delved into AI, if they didn't go into it within a strategy, it's
Mhm.
like an enhanced Google. Like I used to hate doing research papers because I had to keep track of where I found what to do your bibliography. You got to quote your sources, right? But now I can do a paper with no
Mhm.
research. Like I can just throw a phrase at it, let it go find stuff. I mean, maybe it found legitimate sources, but the internet can quote the internet, and anybody can make anything up. Wikipedia is not
Quote the
World
internet.
Book Encyclopedia. So
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
thinking through that, yeah, I can totally see where you're getting that. And the beauty of this, and if you've waited till now where you're paying for tokens, sorry, you missed out. But for a while it was free. So here's why nobody cleans out the junk drawer, right? Or the
Mhm.
common drive in your office. I don't even know how many categories I need. There's 278 items and there's 274 categories. How do I do it?
Yeah.
AI, you can literally point it at 27 text files and say, analyze that, help me normalize that in some kind of way.
Mhm.
AI is remarkable at
Yes,
doing
but it
that
still
kind of
needs
mindless
you
task.
to bring the business intelligence, right? It still needs you to bring the purpose, and then imagine if you've actually properly thought through some of these things and developed a taxonomy previously. So we do this at Brighthelm. We have an architecture that we call the map, right? And it is a structure that is very similar to a practice that I learned in the Navy, where all of our knowledge and all of our practices are organized around a code system, right? So we know certain numbers are just shorthand for certain things, and so we can find things a lot faster. And we use this architecture across all of our own documentation, our processes, our training, our operations, our procedures, everything, right? And having thought that through and created it first, right? When you begin to go down your agentic path, you can simply explain to the agent, here's the schema. And it says, hold my beer, because it can do so much more because you've already thoughtfully given it the structure and it can understand it from its context. This is part of, I think, also a huge shift we're seeing in how people build things, certainly in how I build things in architecture. When you talk about Salesforce as a fixed model, right? It is structured data that is fixed, and we're not building architecture at theory, right? It is a durable fixed architecture, and it's hard typed. If you've been thoughtful about what you build and foregrounded the model and the logic included in that, the agents can do so much better for you. But if you were cutting corners and just sticking things in where you could make them fit, if you were moving fast and breaking things, you're in a lot of trouble right now.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it can't infer from that structure what it really needs.
Yeah, no doubt. I would imagine if you're an admin walking in behind somebody that did that, you're very much like you're inheriting a house from a hoarder that died, right?
Mhm.
It's just, I don't know what to do. I don't even know where to start. Can
Yeah.
we just get a dumpster and a fire and,
Yes.
and go with it?
Mhm.
Talk. So you started out in QA and you moved over to consulting. Talk about and this was interesting to me because I spent almost 12 years owning a system as just a system owner and a program manager. Going into the consulting it was a pretty sharp turn for me. Like I had all this experience, but you have to think about it differently when you wear that hat.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
talk about when you did
Boy.
that and why you did that.
The why is really very simple, and it's a story that tons of people in nonprofits know, which is that when you work inside of a nonprofit organization, the expectation is that you're going to wear an awful lot of hats. And Salesforce, running a good Salesforce instance is a lot like doing the dishes. When the dishes are getting done, nobody notices it. But when the dishes don't get done is when, when
Indeed.
people become aware. Yeah. And I love that job and I really enjoyed it. And I had that implementation really humming after a couple of years there. But they just really needed from me the ability to do jobs that were not Salesforce. And at that point had decided, sorry, this is my future.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
what I do now. Yeah. Yeah. So I made the jump to consulting so that I could do it full time. But of course, the trade off that you're hinting at is you're doing it full time, but they're not your instances. And it's a very different job. And I tell people now when they interview at Brighthelm or they're thinking about getting into consulting, I always take time to point out that, look, I know amazing Salesforce practitioners that are horrible consultants and vice versa. It is very different work and it is not for everybody. And it is a huge mental shift. You are moving away from the most obvious sense, ownership, right? And deep focus on specific processes and specific product to I am an enabler, right? These are not my decisions and it's my job simply to enable the best possible decisions. There's a real paradox in Salesforce consulting that underlies it. And it is that if you are hiring me as a consultant, it is because you are fundamentally unable to assess the quality of my performance as a consultant when we first engage.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
By definition, right? If you were able to talk to me and assess truly that I'm good, right? And that I know what I'm doing and that other people know what they're doing, right? Then you would know enough that you wouldn't need to hire me to begin with.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
it's a real paradox, right? And being a consultant is living with that paradox every day and saying that, what this specific client needs may not be what I would need in this scenario, but it's what this client needs.
Right. Right.
Right. And that takes a lot of emotional maturity and also to balance that between that appropriate level of centering the client, but also not being detached. I think a lot of people in consulting make that work by simply being detached from their work and detached from the outcomes so they can emotionally
Yeah.
manage that.
Yeah.
And I think it works better if you can figure out how to balance between the two, and which is tough.
Yeah. And I think the velocity that AI has forced people to adapt to is making this much more difficult. It does some things
Mhm.
to make up for some of that, but I'm grateful that I started out as an admin and a product owner. I'm grateful that I met 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 and he taught me about 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏 because it brought me to every conversation from a place of compassion.
Mhm.
And empathy. When I got here, I was managing a team, and I will always tell the team, you got to realize the very first call we have with a client, we're going to show up and we're going to trust them, right? They are their process owners, even if they don't necessarily have one, and we have to trust what they're telling us is the truth. We don't know, but we need them to trust us, right?
Yeah.
We've got to realize the only reason we're here is because they reach the end of themselves and says, I can't do this by myself. And that is such an
Yes.
awkward thing for to
Well,
say, I'm
that's
going to
tough.
pay you a lot of money so that I can trust
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
It's a weird dynamic and it's a hard
It is a
thing.
very
And I
weird
think
dynamic.
velocity makes
Yeah.
it difficult because I don't trust people that haven't proven I can trust them. And I
Yeah.
haven't had
And
that chance yet.
velocity is a very unique problem too, because people really do confuse velocity with quality or accomplishment. And things can be very fast and actually be garbage. I think one of the biggest challenges of the AI era is I did this, right? When I would sit down and start playing with something, I would start physically building something very early in the ideation process, right? And start to play around with it and be like, do I like this? Do I not like this? And that process of starting to play with something and seeing it come to fruition. We've all been in this boat if you are a declarative builder, right? I assume it's like this for developers as well. I don't know. But you have an idea of something in your head and when you start doing it, you realize that something you were sure I'm going to do it this way. No, I don't like it that way, right? And so you change. So the friction necessary to figure out if the thing you were doing was good, right, was part of the process. Like it would take you a little time and I would, kind of rub those two sticks together to make a fire and figure out if there was something there, right? The problem now is I've had a few cases where I start thinking about something and I go, this might be a good Lightning Web component. And before when I would have to sort of like grind that out a little bit, it would feel like, oh no, actually I don't really like this. It's not worth my time, right? Now I can turn to Claude and be like, here's my description, here are the specs, here's the use case, and turn my back for a little while and come back and there it is. So that is actually a very unique problem, right? We have baked the filter into whether or not we should do something. We were relying on the friction in the production of the thing.
Yeah.
So now we
Yeah.
have to think those things through so much better on the front end. Consulting has moved away from expertise of how to build a thing properly. We still have to have that, right? That's still there. right? And it's still very challenging, and it's still growing in challenge every single year as the platform becomes more and more complicated. Admins talk about this, like so much more is expected of admins. It's the same in consulting, right? There's so much more, but the real work has moved to the front end of the process. If you have spent more time understanding and documenting the personas, talking to the users, figuring out, exactly what is the model that makes this business a success and what are its inhibitors and what are its accelerators, and you've captured all of that and structured all of that in a way that you can work with, right? Then you can collaborate with a client now with those accelerators in a way that you couldn't before, and you're being more thoughtful about what you're selecting to put into production.
Yeah, and in a
That
lot of
has to
ways, it
come. Yeah.
parallels what Agile did when it came, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You and again, as an engineer, this is just where my brain goes, but if you sat in a room with somebody at the beginning of discovery,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
you're trying to take this undefined animated chaos that is
Hmm.
their current state that required them to call a consultant to come help, you're just trying
Hmm.
to figure out which thread to pull, and they want to throw
Yeah.
58 threads at you and
Yeah.
assume you can track all
Hmm.
50. They can't describe all 58, but that's what they're trying to get through.
Hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's a hard thing, and that in and of itself, going back to this trust thing,
Hmm.
it takes a little bit of time, right?
It does. Yeah. And there is no accelerant for that. There is no
No.
accelerant for creativity. There is absolutely no accelerant for good ideas. There's no accelerant for judgment or for trust. Those things haven't changed. I saw something recently. It was an article that was talking about how many more apps are on the various exchanges now than were ever previously before. There's like a hockey stick diagram making the rounds on Reddit about how people would produce apps, and now in the age of AI, it's like, but that the total user base and downloads has not changed. So
Hmm.
the friction around producing the thing and putting it
Yeah.
out there has collapsed to a floor we've never previously seen. But the market has not increased, right? And as it turns out, there are a whole lot more apps, but it is still just as hard to have a good idea.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no doubt.
that that has just fronted the fact that we were all relying on the friction of the process to get to good ideas. We have to think more intelligently, but more intentionally on the front end to get the same quality out.
Yeah. So if you've joined us and if you've listened to anything in this series prior to now and you've listened to this conversation up until now, they say, I thought this was Salesforce at scale. What are you doing? You've barely talked about Salesforce. Here's why. There is an illusion that, and you've kind of already hit at this point, Hayley. There's an illusion that AI has eliminated 70% of the work. It has not. In fact, I would argue that some of the work has gotten harder
Yes.
because I can only be as good as you can articulate what it is that you want,
Hmm.
right? Automation is stupid. It does exactly what you tell it to do and nothing more.
Hmm.
AI will stretch that bubble a little bit, but
Hmm.
again, it's only as good as its weakest link. So if you're not grounding that prompt, if you're not telling it things about the client, if you haven't fed context into these things, garbage in, garbage out, that still
Yeah.
applies.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
you strike a nerve with me there, and this is something I think clients need to hear, and this is why actually we do this series. Is I contend that when people sit down with Salesforce and they agree to sign that contract and they start off on this journey,
Hmm.
they do what every on-prem solution did back in the day. They
Hmm.
sit here and like this is the start of the project, and there's the go live, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, ma'am.
No.
That's actually the
No.
starting line up there.
No. It's not. I always explain to them, you're
Yeah.
not building a fixed thing. This is more of a garden, and we need to water it. We need to weed it. And sometimes
Yes.
we need to
Perfect.
yank some plants out, and sometimes we need to put some other things in. It's a
Yeah.
continuous process, right? And
Yeah.
I really like resonate with a point you made there around like the importance of like, particularly in agile, thinking things through and not assuming in communication when you're prompting the system, it's dumb and it has to be told these things. One of the best things that I got out of my military career on the point of advantages of military service. In aviation, we have a concept we call crew resource management, which is about preventing human source accidents, right? If you ever look at the history of aviation and aviation accidents, there was a time in early aviation when accidents were technological, right? The plane wasn't good enough. We're trying to make them better. Flying is fundamentally dangerous, right? All the accidents were basically because of the technology. And then at a certain point, they started happening because of human error and became almost exclusively because of human error. For some of us that have been around for a while that are older, we remember the 70s and the 80s when, plane crashes were a little bit more frequent. There really was like a period in the 70s of a lot of them. And a whole study came out of, okay, well, how do we understand the human factors, the human performance factors behind accidents? And a lot of what came out of that is not assuming context, proactively communicating, having a questioning mindset and proactively asking questions. What came out of that study was a set of practices and a way of interacting with people that is a risk manager, right? And they are the same principles that do effective work at scale, right? And they are not assuming context, communicating assertively, having a questioning attitude, being assertive, leadership. Like it's the same list of things, right? Those practices for me were just a pure lift and shift.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
That customer relationship management,
Yes.
the other
Yeah.
CRM, that there's a fence that you've got to straddle. And again, I think AI, I think consulting, I think inflation, I think a lot of things have created some tensions in this space
Hmm.
where the first time, and I go back to, I managed an HOA. Lord forgive me. Wait, a long time ago when we first got married. It's like having a lawyer on retainer, right? When you have a
Mm-hmm.
consultant, like they're over there, and when they show up, the meter's turning. And I feel as a client, I feel obligated to. They talked about this in sales training back in the day. Show up and throw up. I'm going to get in the room. I'm going to spew everything that I can think of
Hmm.
that might be relevant. And then it's your job as the expert to go figure out what of that matters and whatnot. And there's a little bit of truth to that. But to the point of that it's gotten to now with consulting is
Hmm.
you have to structure that conversation. Like you have to do a flyover at 100,000 feet and come in at
Yeah.
50,000 feet and come down to 10,000 feet. And you're just peeling the onion to get to this place where
Hmm.
now you and I are in a vocabulary and we've established some trust and understanding and reaffirming those
The
things as you
shared
go.
vocabulary, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so much of it is about it's a curve of training, right? Like clients will sometimes ask me about like, well, the the project will we do the training? I'm like, we're gonna start on day one, honey.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
it's a continual education just so you can achieve the same vocabulary. This is the thing that I think consultants don't always realize, or that clients don't really realize, is you're not when you're selecting a consultant, you're selecting also not just a set of values and a quality of practice, a quality of technical build, right? But you are also selecting a methodology. And
Mhm.
it's important to understand those choices and what you're choosing in between. Clients always look at price, they look at timelines, they look at things they should look at. I'm not looking down on any of those. But you're also making a choice around methodology, and you need to be proactive around asking what is the methodology and,
Yeah.
and why to be sure that it's going to resonate with how you do business.
Yeah, I personally have become much more involved in change management than the Salesforce side.
Hmm.
I just kind of got to this place in my career. I'm like, I just don't like reading 700 pages of release notes. I don't like going before. At that time, I had 1,500 users and 9 business units in my one org,
Yeah.
and I
Hmm.
had to appear before all of them and know enough to talk about any topic they bring up.
Hmm.
And I just got to that place where I just that wasn't what I wanted to do
Yeah.
anymore.
Well, that's not realistic anymore. Yeah.
But
Mm.
but in change management, and this relates to kind of where you were going, the there's different methodologies. They may be right, they may be wrong, or some level of gray in between.
Hmm.
And I've been doing project management for 30 years. I've seen every gamut of right and wrong and how
Hmm.
that looks. But so many people, you know this. I just want the cheapest one. Okay, well, I can go buy the cheapest car and you're going to have a certain type of experience. And
Hmm.
you can build a certain kind of plane and have a certain kind of experience. But there's an upper echelon that just changes some of those things, how you approach those things. And then there's somewhere in the middle. It's like I got a little give and take. Yes,
Hmm.
there's a cost. There's absolutely a cost to
Hmm.
implementing some of these guardrails in this trust circle between you and I
Hmm.
around how we do those things. But let me tell you, if I had one sentence to undergird why we do this series, there's a cost to not doing it too.
Boy, there
And
is.
it's undefined and there is no bottom to the hole, right?
Yes, and it's a cost that usually goes unmeasured, unfortunately. It's really hard to get people to, assess, like, I'm looking at, hiring a consultant spending this level of money. How do you then put right next to
Correct.
it the cost of not doing this or choosing a different approach, right? And you know what? Look, for your organization, some of those costs may make sense. I often tell clients when I surface business decisions for them, I'm not here to tell you what your priorities are. I'm just here to surface all of the costs that you haven't considered and all of the pros and cons to get it all out there. And then you're going to make the best business decision that you can. But that assumes you're working with someone that understands there are secondary and tertiary costs and are thinking that through. That is a shortcoming that knows no industry, like
Yeah.
knows
Correct.
no sides of
Correct.
business, right? When I first started doing this almost exclusively with nonprofits, I would sometimes think like, oh, it would be so nice to work with a for-profit company that had a broader budget and, understood business and everything. As it turns out, no.
Nope.
I've
Nope.
worked with larger organizations, more money, more problems. They're just different problems. right? All of the industries, right, struggle with this. I've worked with people often say, particularly in my subset right now, so we're super active in the nonprofit space. So we're living with this whole, the old product is NPSP and now it's AFNP. And, there are a lot of people who I have deep technical respect for their work, right? Who feel very strongly that the answer there is around the size of the organization,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
this product is good for small and this product is good for big. And I disagree. It's got nothing to do with size. It's got
Yeah.
everything to do with their values, what their goals are, how they want to manage the instance, how much overhead they can put into it. I've seen small organizations be very, very successful with powerful tooling. I've seen big ones completely fail. It has to do with their mindset and what they're trying to accomplish and what their organization is like.
And their ability to have a vision. We talk about
Hmm.
MVP around here a lot.
Hmm.
When I first got an ecosystem, I used to hear this phrase all the time: "Don't try and boil the ocean." You need to understand, and I think during discovery,
Hmm.
it's fair game. I want to understand the ocean. I want to know where the shores are. I want to know what kind of gremlins lurk in the deep that I don't know about. I want to know
Hmm.
all of those things because whether we do the whole thing or do some little part of it, the whole thing
Yeah.
matters. It's an eventual end
Hmm.
game. It's a vision we want to
Hmm.
get to. But if you start with that end in mind and you don't necessarily consider all these things in the middle, you're going to get to that end zone and go.
You're going to be in trouble. Yeah. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really, really difficult thing to explain to a client. And customers
Hmm.
who've been through it know it, and they generally won't make that mistake again. But
There are a lot of really smart customers out there. Yeah.
there are. Let's talk a little bit about Brighthelm. I mean, it's where you spend your time now, obviously.
Hmm.
It because of your evolution of things you've done and places you've worked and whatnot.
Hmm.
I always see these foundations kind of raising. Like I started out here with X amount of skills, X amount of experience, and I built on that. And some of that's refinement. Some of it's like just knowing what not to do or knowing what I don't want to do, whatever that is. What led you to fund a new company? And I'm always intrigued when somebody says, I chose to go nonprofit because if there's anything that's undefined, it's the concept of nonprofit, right? There's legal
Love it.
terms to it. There's tax brackets to it. There's markets. And
That is a deep topic, and I have spicy takes.
this might be the first time I have to do outtakes on the backside of the
Yeah.
episode.
Hmm. A lot of the frustration for me of moving out of the military and into civilian service, right? And I do look at it that way, but it is an exquisite privilege of my life that I got to spend my formative working years working in an organization that was mission focused, and at a very material level, you become psychologically addicted. It's a terrible way to put it, but I deeply valued and got a lot of satisfaction out of the fact that when I got up in the morning and went to work, that what I did mattered in a very deep way. And the more uncomfortable usually my circumstances were, the more unforgiving the workload was, the more dangerous, the more what I did mattered. And that's something that's a structure in your life. It's something that colors all other things and flavors everything you do. And I really value that, and I didn't want to lose that. Right. So I wanted to find that same value, right? And I'm not saying that business oriented work can't be that way. I am still one of these people that really believes in business as an effector of change, and I run my business that way, right? I do a lot of things at Brighthelm that my competitors don't do because I feel strongly about business as an engine for change, right? But the color of life when your higher calling, right, is certain outcomes is something I really find compelling. And many of our clients also exist at the intersection between a classic nonprofit and a for-profit enterprise, or around economic opportunity, or around like community-based funding. It's not always a real crisp line, right? So that's part of why we like to say Brighthelm supports mission-driven organizations. We're very consciously not using the word nonprofit there because how exactly that's defined. Now, it turns out my book of business is predominantly nonprofits and a higher ed, right?
Mhm.
But we're kind of dancing and playing with that terminology because that's really what we're focused on. And I wanted the ability to approach business from a value oriented, from my values, not from like a monetary value, but I wanted instead to defy the paradigm that consulting is a treadmill, and it's really a function of booking the hours and trying to maximize the output, and seeing how many hours you can get out of each and every individual one of your people, and thriving that system by bidding up for labor and paying some people really hard. I wanted to back off of all that and say, could we turn this into a life that is sustainable, that is pleasant, that is flexible, that allows us to interact with the clients in a more meaningful way, be choosy about the type of work that we do, and prioritize those things beyond and above pure financial achievement.
Yeah.
And it has turned out that the financial piece has followed, right? But that was a lot of the incentive. I really struggled with coming out of the military and knowing I had skills around how to organize teams, how to execute on missions, how to get things done. But I couldn't, because I didn't have the social hallmarkers that people expected to come with that. I couldn't
Yeah.
convince them to give me those chances. And after constantly having that door closed, I finally just said, okay, fine.
Yeah. I am struggling so hard to stay on the Salesforce topic because you keep alluding to military things that I'm so tempted to go into that road. I'll add this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a statistic like 88% of veterans, the first job they found coming out of the military, 88% quit the first year.
Mm.
And I would argue the thing you just said is the number one reason why.
It's a lot of
That
it.
they want to find a job or a career, but they want to find a purpose that gives the fulfillment that they had at being invincible, at plan, execute, review, improve, repeat. That concept of honing, of not just being able to articulate what a dream result is, but to reliably and consistently achieve
and you
that.
have half of it. That's one side of it. The other side of it is particularly if you're like me, right? And I enlisted straight out of high school. You know, I had no other job. That was my entire working life, right? You have this on one side, and then on the other side, you have people don't understand it and they struggle with it, and you're not speaking the same language. When I got out of the service, right, my last job before I retired was as a senior enlisted leader of a detachment of 40 or 50 people that I was moving in and out of war zones. We were flying combat missions. I was responsible for highly classified material for people's lives, for safety, right? I went from that to struggling to get a job. And the first job I got when I got out of college was cleaning pools because those were the only people who would hire me. So it takes, and I clawed up from that. Like we've talked about my Salesforce career, but there's a pre-trajectory of just getting somebody to give me a job. And I interviewed with nonprofits, and what I heard over and over again was, we just don't understand how your background relates to anything we're doing here, right? And I struggled with that in Salesforce, right? When I worked at other firms, I would share ideas or I would talk about things and people would say, that's something you want to do because your background is in the military. And you just, that would work in the military, but that's not going to work here. So you constantly get told that is not for here. And I think that's also part of why, vets find each other, because we're all consoling each other over this. Like we've all been through this and we know there are ways that we can make things better, but nobody will. I mean, it sounds horrible to say, like we have the answers, but nobody will listen to us, but it's not untrue, right? The military is very performative. You can go measure these things and see, right? But I reached a point where I thought, I just want to prove it can be done. And so I decided to do it myself.
That's a good reason to start a business. You and I got to talk offline about some of those things because there's so many intriguing things there that I would want to pull at. Veteran owned and women owned. I want to give you a chance to platform both of those. Talk to me a little bit about your ideas there and what that means even beyond the boundaries of Brighthelm.
Yeah. I mean, this starts to get a little woo-woo, particularly when you're talking about the women-owned stuff, and I'll just put it out there, and maybe it resonates with some people and maybe not. I think of entrepreneurship. I heard a story once, and it has always stuck with me. I didn't come up with this, right? But someone wrote an explanation of what entrepreneurship is, and they said that entrepreneurship is like the fair, and the privileged, the wealthy, can come and buy as many tickets at the booth as they want and take as many shots as they want, right? And if their first couple, 2, 3 don't hit the mark, that's fine. But eventually they'll keep spending the money and buying the tickets and keep taking the shots. And then eventually they'll hit a jackpot and they'll leave with the big stuffy and it'll be a success, right? For middle class people, you get one ticket and you get one shot. And some number of them will hit the jackpot and walk away. And we will say, capitalism was justified. Hard work did it, right? This proves the value of the system. The poor kids don't get a shot. They're working the fair. And I feel very strongly that if you come from a viewpoint of systemically realizing that people are not always in positions of power and privilege because they are smarter or more successful, then you are open to realizing that there are great ideas in lots of different places and that they look in different ways. As a woman moving through tech and moving through the military, right, that is an infrastructure that does not afford me certain privileges. right? There are default assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of as a woman that I have to carry into every room I walk into that men do not. And I can only imagine what that burden is like for women of color, right? So if you come from that viewpoint of understanding, right, that I am able to run this business, to be in this opportunity, not because I'm smarter, better than my own employees, but because a series of happy accidents led me to this place and I had the opportunity and that I re-earned the right to be in that seat every single day. That is a viewpoint of someone who does not come from a position of privilege. That to me is what it is to be a woman owned. And that
it's not indifferent from the story that reminds me of how Sylvester Stallone got his start. He
Mhm.
was a poor kid on the streets of Philly who wrote Rocky, and he absolutely refused to let it go unless he played that role. And he didn't quit. I mean, he struggled.
Yeah.
He
And it was the making of him. Yeah.
his decisions led to more struggle
Mhm.
because he believed he had something, and he was right.
Mhm.
Right? He built an entire industry, and the 80s and 90s were changed by his refusal to compromise in that. And I think there's so much wisdom in that. If 50 minutes in, you're still here. If anybody says that Hayley's not qualified to do this, then pound sand. There's no doubt in my mind your experience and success probably underrepresents what all you're capable of. And that's no slam on what you've been able to do. Just I believe in your talent and your ability.
That is very
Veteran
good.
owned. This is actually somewhere I'm wanting to take our military minute series of the podcast, is talking about entrepreneurship, because I think for a lot of the things that we've talked about today, when you're in that environment for 3 or 4 years of enlistment or 25 years of enlistment, and I think a lot, I don't know what percentage of people who serve started right out of high school. Some lied to start before they got out of high school or signed at 17. But those years of, you and I talked about choosing something that got us out of our house to go get some experience, whatever that is. You don't realize how uninformed, how unstructured, how inexperienced, right? You just don't have a place to operate from other than that of your childhood. And at 17, I'm sorry, people used to get married at 14 and have all these, there was a king in the Bible at 8.
Yeah.
You just, in this day and age of what we raise our kids with and the experiences they're given, they just don't have those tools. So if your first and most prominent experience is that of the military, there's an efficiency, a rigidity, a success rate, a trust, a camaraderie, a refusal
A
to
standard.
settle for second best that shapes you. And I would argue stepping from that into almost any civilian job is going to feel like a step down.
Oh, yeah.
Not to say there aren't good jobs and good companies, there are, but that feeling you get, it's a high, right? It's an endorphin that you feel when you succeed at something. And the probability, to your point, if I go to a fair and I'm well-to-do and I throw 1,000,000 balls at the monkey and I knock one down, I get my plushie, I go home. To me, it was a success because I didn't sacrifice anything. I just kept throwing money at it until I got what I wanted. There's another biblical adage there about the person who lost their penny,
talents.
and it was all they had. Absolutely. The parable of the talents. If I've given everything, and whether I succeed or not, I know I showed up and I gave everything. And that's just something you don't commonly see in civilian life. And this, honestly, in the vets that I mentor, that's one of the things I talk about. You've got to wrap your head around this. And like, companies want to succeed, but it's not for the same reasons, right? And we could do 1,000,000 episodes probably on that topic alone. But I think the vets becoming entrepreneurs is the absolute refusal to compromise and step into a place where they can't be all they can be, to pardon the great arm.
And I would combine, yes, that drive for excellence, that drive for purpose and mission, and that refusal to accept anything less is half of it. I'm going to give you the other half. It's the ability to look around and say, if it's not me, then who? Right? Like, one of the biggest things you get out of servant leadership is that if something needs to be done, the buck stops with you. I used to tell sailors when I was still in the Navy, and people would complain about things sometimes, and they would say, that's not fair. My answer was, fair is where you take your kids. This is the United States Navy.
Indeed.
Right?
Indeed.
It's a thing needs to be done. It needs to be done. And I think that people often talk about whether or not people should be entrepreneurs or if they can be entrepreneurs. I think for veterans, there's not a sense of could I, should I, is this right? There's a sense of I have an unrelenting standard, and if not me, then who? And I accept that responsibility. And I think it's that combination.
And it's interesting to me because of the veterans, I cannot resist going down the veteran road here a little bit, because I think it matters in the purpose of scaling. Right?
Salesforce, but
this is what you get in veteran hiring.
Mhm.
That servant leadership, I'm gonna say it's more of a byproduct than a product of what's taught.
Mhm.
If all of us stand in a room and we align and we look at the same thing and go, we're all on
Mhm.
the same mission. We know what that is and we're all going the same way. Whereas if
Mhm.
somebody at the top setting that mission and we all played that game where you went around the room and told this thing, by the time it gets down to the people who are actually moving the thing, I don't even
Yeah.
know what you're looking at, right? I'm just heads down
Mhm.
trying to do this thing. And the industrial era revolution, a lot of that stuff brought that mass production, less
Mhm.
compassion kind of a thing out of it. But I think it's so important in America and today. And this must be a part of what's going on with my algorithm because I'm just seeing so much content driving at this.
Mhm.
Anybody can look like an expert. AI can
Mhm.
take
Mhm.
3 days of experience and make it look like I've got a PhD in 50 years.
Mhm.
There's so much surface stuff.
Mhm.
But and this, I'm going to bring this back to Salesforce at scale. If you've moved fast and broken things on the surface, that things look good. If you've not done the work, if you've not embraced that attitude, if not me, then who? If you've not jumped in a room and said this matters, and I'm not going to compromise. We got to have a validation rule. We got to drive quality. We got to do these things. If you don't
Mhm.
make that a part of the recipe of this thing that you're doing in this implementation, you will pay for it. Either you're eventually going to
Unequivocally.
come around in
Yeah.
AI and have to clean it up and pay for it, or you're going
Yeah.
to say, I'm paying all this for the platform and I just can't get the value out of it because I didn't do those hard things on the front side.
Or you'll pay in the loss of your best talent, right? Your talent also demands that you make smart decisions and create the right work environment, right? That's another way you can lose
Yeah.
if you're careless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
I want to wrap up with this one. And this is definitely not a yes or a no. I don't know if there's a wrong answer here, but
Ooh, I'm
what
intrigued.
is still missing or underdone in how the Salesforce ecosystem serves nonprofits, higher ed, public sector? Like those are just a different type of client.
Mm. Mhm.
But when you think about not for profit, I think is a better way of saying this. It's all those other people.
Mhm.
What's your take on that?
A couple of thoughts in this space, and I think when we think about at a very immediate practical place of like what is not getting done at the level it probably should. I don't think it's just nonprofit work, but I'm going to go back to again. There is so much focus on a visible output, right? That the invisible necessary work is very difficult to get people to value, and so consequently genuinely doesn't get done. And I have essentially built entire practice out of people who have attempted consulting in the past and that work didn't get done and they wound up with a mess and now I'm cleaning up the mess and they were doing it together because they've made the mistake and they understand the cost and now they're coming back and they're trying to do it properly. And I think that there are special pressures on nonprofits that result in those things around how we as a society fund them and govern them, right? They're governed by boards, which are typically not nonprofit people. They're typically business people because we have this belief in our society that because they were successful at business, they can be successful at anything. And so then we put them on boards and then they want to see results and they want to see certain things happen. And they're too abstracted from the work to understand the necessary pre-work. And then we combine this with inside of nonprofits, there is a valorization of scarcity. This idea of every single penny of the donor's dollar is going straight to the mission. And if we spend any money on systems or investment or overhead, that is overhead and is evil. And you will talk with nonprofit practitioners that'll be like, look how shitty my chair is because everything goes to the mission. And it causes toxic choices, right? That will often put organizations in these places. I will often talk to people, and you combine this also with, and this is where the take gets a little spicy. Historically, Salesforce has made generous grants to nonprofits, right? And I've often heard it described as, parking a Ferrari in front of the place and tossing the keys in and not fully explaining it, right? Like Salesforce is really, a lot. And that gift does take a lot to capitalize on. But I have seen in some cases that atrophy into a sense of entitlement,
Mhm.
right? That I should not be paying full prices for these things, right? Simply because of who we are. Somebody's paying that price,
Right.
right? And pro bono work often causes people to devalue what's happening there and not invest enough. There is, in my opinion, too much of a push to figure out how to get them things as cheaply as possible without asking whether or not that should be the case and what are the downstream effects of that. There are other people making their living too, right? And all of us are collaborating in this space, right? And that drives choices for these organizations that are extremely limiting, that they can't really fully participate in that choice because they don't understand the full consequences of it, right? I talk with people all the time that are like, well, this is where these people belong because of this and because they're a nonprofit. And so it has to be cheap and it has to be. Does it have to be?
Yeah.
Does it really? Have we like thought through what some of the other options and is this a reasonable place to make an investment? I'm not saying it always is, right? But we don't do enough of that deeper financial analysis and looking at the secondary costs and the secondary outcomes and really understanding what investment is. Because we measure in our society a successful nonprofit based on what portion of that dollar goes immediately to the mission. And that is a broken structure, right? And it drives GuideStar, it drives payroll giving, it drives Benevity, and that whole system ensures that these organizations are locked in underserving situations, right?
Mhm.
So I think that that's definitely a problem that is unique to the sector that I don't know how that gets fixed. I don't know how
Yeah.
that gets addressed, other than courageous nonprofit leaders I've worked with that have said, no, this is an investment not in overhead, but in capacity.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah.
you can say 95 cents of the dollar goes to the mission, but what if it's 450 of $5? More money went to the mission, right? I spent more in overhead, but more ultimately went to the mission. It's a change in mindset.
Yeah.
And
At some
I
point
don't
in
know
that
that,
chain,
yeah.
value has to matter, right? So we'll
Mhm.
come full circle with that. We started out talking a little bit about AI. I think we've successfully covered all 3 series today. We started out talking about AI. We talked about the 𝗪𝗪 effect, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't do the little things, the big things get incredibly more expensive and complicated and harder to
I've never
untangle.
heard GeiGo. I'm totally stealing that.
6th grade play. We did a play called the 𝗪𝗪 effect, and it stuck. 1983, baby. It's like I remember it like it was yesterday. But character, who you are when no one's watching, purpose. If not me, then who? I'm reading up on Travis Manion Foundation, and that was a statement that he
Yes.
stood behind. And
Yeah.
I'm forgetting the name of the segment, but there's Character Matters, I think, is the name of the segment inside Travis Manion about that. And it's because I didn't serve, I didn't put on that uniform. My best friend was a police officer killed in the line of duty, and I saw what happened around his family when that happened. Those kinds of people. I mention this all the time when I hear about that. I got your 6. We say this to civilians all the time. I got your back. I'd die for you. I'll help you bury a body. Come on. In reality, truth matters, quality matters, character matters, and results should be more than a financial statement, right? There's so much wisdom here. Hayley, I think we've cracked open the first 1% of the things I want to talk about with you. Thank you for your service to our nation.
Thank you for having me. It was super fun.
Thank you for bringing that out and not just going and getting a job, but finding a career that has all the values and you refuse to compromise. And man, I am so grateful that Bill this time said, go talk to Hayley. But it was great to meet you in person. It's great to sit down and talk with you today. I think we're going to have some more conversations in the future, but I really appreciate
I look forward to it.
you showing up today and talking to our audience. So for scaling Salesforce, everything I just said applies.
True.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
You too.
All right. That's a wrap for today's episode of Serious Talk, Salesforce at Scale. A sincere thank you to Hayley Tuller for sitting down with us and for 20 years of service to this country as a Navy cryptologic technician, including combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. There's one thing to carry out of this conversation. It's her point about map. Build the taxonomy, document the process, and put the structure in place before you ever hand the keys to an agent, because AI will only accelerate what you've already built. That includes a mess. If this episode gave you something useful, subscribe to the show and leave us a review. It genuinely helps more listeners find these conversations. Show notes and links to everything we discussed are below. As always, a thank you to Jason Fowler for allowing use of his song, Mystery Road. Reach out to us anytime at Serious Talk at SeriousSolutions.com. We'd love to have some input from you or help you with any questions that you have in navigating your Salesforce solution. Until next time.